Very good evening to one and all. Very good evening to Sandeep Shastri sir. At the eve of the Republic Day, as India celebrates its 75th year of being a republic, it's an honor and pleasure that we have amongst us Dr. Sandeep Shastri. Dr. Sandeep Shastri, we all know, is a columnist and author, political scientist, a psychologist, wears multiple hats. Beyond all, a very passionate teacher. I've had the privilege of being under him, working under him, and also being taught through him. And in the past few years at India for IS, we've had the privilege that at the eve of Independence Day and at the eve of Republic Day, we've had lectures from Sir addressing critical issues that the nation faces, specifically to polity and governance. And this primarily helps most of them who attend the interview and all other aspirants of civil services who make their foray, who are beginners and also going through their journey into civil services. Sir has recently joined NITTE Education Trust and presently is Vice President of Bangalore campus of NITTE Education Trust and continues to serve in various aspects. You will see him in national television addressing multiple panel discussions and specifically an election as such. Very respectful voice across the academic circles in Karnataka and India. Presently in Myanmar, he was helping the democracy initiative in Myanmar. At the end of the session, probably would love to know how is it in Myanmar presently being in the military rule also. So with those few words, I would now hand it over to Sir. Thank you very much, Sir, that you made time for us. And it's a pleasure that we hear from you all once again.
Thank you, Prashant, and my greetings to all the young aspirants for the civil services. It's indeed a pleasure and joy to dialogue with you all today on the eve of the 75th celebration of our republic. I will send Prashant a link to something that is being published tomorrow, which I call a political balance sheet of the Indian Republic. And some of you may find that useful to look at. As per Prashant's mandate, because we all need to follow what our students ask us to do. And I've been privileged to have Prashant as part of my class, and he always kept me on my toes. He has identified 4 or 5 themes: one nation, one election, the impact and implications of delimitation, the debate on the caste census, the working of the judiciary, and federalism. So I'm going to talk about these 5 issues to begin with, and I'll be happy to respond to questions that may come in from your side. My suggestion would be I take each of these issues and talk about them for around 10 to 12 minutes each. Prashant, do you think we should have a discussion after each issue, or after all the issues we have a discussion? How would you prefer it? Prashant, would you prefer a discussion after each issue or after all the 4 issues are discussed?
The last comment was after each issue, sir, which was pretty helpful. I think we can start.
Okay. We'll do that. So what I'll do is I'll keep 10 minutes aside for each issue and break after that and see if there are any questions that you all have, and then take it to the next issue. Is that okay? Now, the first issue that I wanted to spend time talking about is this whole debate on one nation, one election. The 129th amendment to the Constitution, which is now before a joint parliamentary committee, and the amendment to the Union Territories Act of 1963. Now, both these measures are now being reviewed by a joint parliamentary committee. And what is the logic of this particular measure? This measure seeks to hold Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha elections across the country at one time, the simultaneous conduct of both these elections, followed after 100 days by the local bodies election. So this is the plan: the simultaneous holding of Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha polls, and after a 100-day gap, the holding of the local body election. Now, a little background to this. Up till 1962, the first three general elections we had, 1952, 1957, and 1962, by and large, with one exception here or one exception there, we more or less had simultaneous Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha polls. In an odd state here or an odd state there, when the assembly was dissolved prematurely, then of course it fell out of this 5 year cycle. But by and large, most states were part of this cycle till 1962. The challenge began after 1967 with the early dissolution of assemblies. You will notice that in 1967, for the first time, the Congress was defeated in many states, and you had coalition governments being formed in the states, many of which could not survive the entire 5 years, resulting in the dissolution of the House. Subsequent to that, you also have had Lok Sabhas which did not complete their 5 year terms. So, post 1967, we have had no co-terminus terms for the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, and the Lok Sabha and the State Assembly. And we have had the staggered election cycles for Lok Sabha elections, and the different states having their own cycles for the Vidhan Sabha elections. Now, for quite some time, there has been talk that we should have a common cycle of elections. If I could just quickly trace the background, there is the Election Commission report of 1983, 42 years ago, which talked about it. The National Commission for the Review of the Working of the Constitution said it in its report in 2002. The Law Commission has said it in three of its reports, 1999, 2015, and 2018. And the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law made the same suggestion in 2015. A NITTE Aayog paper made this recommendation in 2017. And of course, the most recent intervention on this was the high-level committee called the Kovind Committee, because the chair of this committee was the former president, Mr. Ramnath Kovind. And this, appointed in September 23, was supposed to look at this suggestion for a one nation, one election. And if you look at the terms of reference given to the high-level committee, it was basically supposed to look at are there any merits in holding a single election cycle for Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha elections. And in their report, which they submitted, they basically made three or four important points. They, of course, recommended a simultaneous Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha poll. They said it would optimize scarce resources. They also went on to say it will result in less disruption to governance and less of policy paralysis. They also said it would impact less negatively on labor, because now with these frequent elections and declaration of holidays for working, the labor force, they argued, face important challenges. So for all these reasons, they recommended, the HLC, the high-level committee recommended that we do go in for a single election for Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabhas at the same time. And this report was submitted just before the 2024 elections, and the BJP and NDA did make it an issue during the election. And soon after the results came, given the fact that the BJP had to secure a majority under the umbrella of the NDA, there was no high ticket measure, unlike 2014, unlike 2019, where one big decision was taken in the first 100 days. Given the fact of coalition, that became little difficult to do. And so this was one of the issues they brought in after that 100 days to as a high ticket measure, saying that we are bringing in this legislation on one nation, one election. And when moving the amendment bill in the Lok Sabha, when he moving the amendment, the 129th Amendment Bill, the law minister made certain important points. Uh, he said it would sanitize in important ways the electoral process. Um, you will not have every year two, three elections happening. Now, many people thought that elections in India had become like the festivals of India. When Sankranti is over, something else comes. When that is over, something else comes. When that is over, the Dasara comes. When that is over, Diwali comes. When that is over, Christmas comes. Then New Year comes. So we continuously seem to be moving from one election to another. So the argument which the law minister made was that we would sanitize the system and have elections only once in 5 years. Uh, they argued it would lead to greater managerial efficiency. It would reduce administrative and fiscal costs. And I mean, if you look at it in the way of an efficient, clinically perfect and precise system is what they wanted to achieve. But the questions that we need to raise on this are two, three. Number one, when you talk of a single election, a common time frame of elections for Vidhan Sabha and the Lok Sabha, what impact does this have on the federal system? Because state governments are chosen on one mandate, Vidhan Sabha, Lok Sabha is chosen on another mandate. And we have another trend coming in, and we in Karnataka are the ones who started this trend in 1984-85, which is voters vote one way in a Lok Sabha elections and voters vote one way in a Vidhan Sabha election. Uh, if some of you would recall that in 1984, end of the year, when we had a Lok Sabha election soon after Indira Gandhi's assassination, the Congress did very well in that election. In Karnataka, they won 24 of the 28 seats, even though the Janta Party was in power under Ramakrishna Hegde in Karnataka. And Ramakrishna Hegde resigned on moral grounds at that point of time, and the assembly was dissolved. And 3 months later, you had a fresh Vidhan Sabha election in which the Janta Party was voted to power with a clear majority. So it was like the voters saying that for parliament, yes, we want the Congress, but for the state, we want the Janta Party. This was 1984-85. So again, 41 years ago. And today, this trend is seen in many states, be it Maharashtra, be it Haryana, be it Jharkhand, be it Delhi. Delhi, I don't know whether we will say that in a month, but if you look at the last two cycles of elections in Delhi, a clean sweep in Lok Sabha elections and clean sweep for AAP in the assembly election. So this distinction has been maintained by the voter, and uh, belief that Lok Sabha elections are different and Vidhan Sabha elections are different. Now, would that get impacted? Would that federal fairness, the fact that a Vidhan Sabha election happens on one set of issues and the Lok Sabha election happens on another set of issues, is the question. And do we sacrifice political costs for the sake of saving administrative and fiscal costs? And if you look at the statement of former Chief Election Commissioner Dr. Qureshi, he says that even fiscal costs will not be saved because you will have to increase and ramp up the number of EVM machines you have if you're going to have simultaneous Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha polls across the country everywhere. Now, that I think is a important question that we need to look at. For me, I think the important factor that voters make different choices at the two levels of elections is important. If I could share a data point with you, between 2014 and 2023, that 9 year stretch, we have had something like 58 Vidhan Sabha and Lok Sabha elections. And in 31 of them, in 31 of the Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha elections, the verdict in the Lok Sabha election in a state and the verdict in a Vidhan Sabha election in the state has been different. That means different parties have got a majority. in 31 of the 58 such elections held between 2014 and 2023. And the wider the gap between the Vidhan Sabha and the Lok Sabha election, the more likely is there a difference in the verdict that is emerging. So the question then comes up, do we respect the voters' differential choice? I must also make this point that today in discussions, a lot of political parties and leaders who officially support one nation, one election are arguing that our hope is that if there is one nation, one election, um, the national trend will get translated into the state trend. But after the 2024 results came, many people wondered whether that will actually happen. What if a state trend defines a national trend? Uh, I have been one of those with my colleagues arguing that the 2024 elections to the Lok Sabha produced what was called a diversity dividend. State by state, the results were different. Region by region, the results were different. And why I believe it provided a diversity dividend is in state assembly elections, after that, political parties are trying to encash on that dividend, which the Lok Sabha election provided. Um, so, given the fact that Lok Sabha elections, Vidhan Sabha elections are fought on different principles, would it be okay to have a simultaneous poll? We are, I mean, those who support one poll believe that you would sweep the elections in a particular direction. Uh, would you really have less disruption in governance? The logic, therefore, being because we have frequent elections, there is less governance. If we do not have frequent elections, does it automatically, therefore, mean we will have better governance in the country? Or misgovernance, is it because of a range of other factors and elections only become the excuse for that? And do you really save fiscal costs? I think all these questions need to be debated. And given the fact that India is increasingly becoming an election only democracy, um, do you want to have the voter of India who asserts her independence quite often? Or would you have this voter only exercising that prerogative once in 5 years? I think these are important questions that would need to be addressed. And remember, when you had the recent Maharashtra assembly elections, you simultaneously had the Nanded Lok Sabha bypoll also, and that result was very interesting. The Nanded Lok Sabha bypoll seat was won by the Congress, but all the assembly segments under Nanded were won by the BJP. So simultaneous election also produced diametrically different results. Now, I have been writing that there are two alternatives to one nation, one election. Alternative one is you hold the Lok Sabha election once in 5 years and look at the German system of constructive vote of no confidence, where you cannot remove a government unless you put in place an alternative government within that 5 years. So you do not look at the dissolution of the House prior to that. So once in 5 years, you have the Lok Sabha election cycle. And in the third year of that 5 year cycle, you hold the Vidhan Sabha elections, all Vidhan Sabha elections together in that third year of that 5 year cycle. So every fifth year, you will have a Lok Sabha election. Every third year, you will have again, you will have the cycle of the Vidhan Sabha election, and you could have the local body election with that. That is one alternative that I have written about. The other alternative is all elections due in a particular year are held in the same month of the year. So you don't stagger it across the year. You fix a particular month a year and say all elections due in a particular year are held in that month only. So I think we need to debate all these three alternatives: one nation, one election, one nation, two elections, by which I mean Lok Sabha one cycle, Vidhan Sabha one cycle, or one nation fixed election cycle every year for whichever elections are due in a particular year. I think these issues will need to be debated before we take a final decision on this matter. So let me stop here on this first issue of one nation, one election, and look for any comments, any comments, suggestions, and possibly even criticisms that you may have for what I said. Let me put a stop to it for a moment, just to get responses.
Yeah, so the participants are free to raise their questions. You can unmute yourself. We have allowed you to unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself and ask questions. Preference to those who are attending interview in the upcoming days. Although probably one question can be from the interview panel also in the idea of, will one nation, one election serve as a death knell or probably completely deride the region specific or regional issues, because when a national level election comes in and more focus is on the national level leaders and others, if that is a question, or regional parties also, but then you have addressed the larger idea of regional parties, regional issues.
Prashant, the expectation of those who endorse one nation, one election is that when you have a national and state assembly election together, the national election trend will sweep the state elections also. That the way national elections goes, the same way the state assembly election would also go. And logically, whenever you have had the two together, that has actually happened. Now, but if you pause for a moment and look at the 2024 Lok Sabha election, you will notice that in many states of India, uh, Uttar Pradesh as an example, West Bengal as an example, I'm just taking two examples. The national verdict was defined by the state trend. So a lot of leaders in conversations whose parties support one nation, one poll, uh, have been arguing that should we think a little about it? Will it really result in what we are expecting it to result in? What if, what if a state verdict results in a national verdict? I'll give you two examples for this. Uh, Prashant would remember, many others may be a little younger to remember that. It was 20 years ago. In 2004, everybody thought the BJP was coming back to power. Uh, Vajpayee had fought that election on the India Shining campaign, and the party lost the election. Now, वाजपेयी जी after that election said कौन जीते उन्हें मालूम नहीं कैसे जीते जो हारे उन्हें मालूम नहीं क्यों हारे. Those who won did not know how they won. Those who lost did not know why they lost. Some of us wrote then saying the argument was simple. There were 4 or 5 states which altered the verdict. Uttar Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, and Maharashtra were 3 states which dramatically altered the 2004 verdict, and BJP, which with the NDA had a majority earlier, lost that majority. And I would say similarly for the 2024 elections. What led to the BJP fall from 303 to 240? I would say you look at, again, 5 states of India. You look at Uttar Pradesh, you look at Bihar, you look at West Bengal, you look at Maharashtra, and you look at Rajasthan. If you look at the electoral outcome in these 5 states, it accounts for the BJP's dramatic fall to 240. And if you look at specifically Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal, and Maharashtra, the deficit of 32 that the party faced from the majority mark was the seats that they lost in these states. So increasingly, state level verdicts are defining national outcomes. Now, there are 3 questions in the chat box. I think I would have been happy if these civil servant aspirants actually, rather than talking on the chat box, actually opened up, because your communication skills to be able to respond is more important. Uh, what will be the situation in case of premature dissolution of government would be. Now, as I said, if you go in for a 5-year term question, I would believe we need to bring in the German system, which is the term of the House is fixed for 5 years. Once a government is formed, that government cannot be removed until such time as an alternative government is selected by the House. The old government is voted out only when the alternative with a clear majority is voted in, which means in 1999, when Vajpayee lost by one vote, uh, that government would not have been voted out if, because we know that once that government was defeated, nobody else was able to form the government and the House had to be dissolved. So, under the constructive vote of no confidence system, you do not get a government out until a alternative government is put in place. There is also a question which says, let's imagine, even though there are going to implement one nation, one election, what possible modifications do we make to the policy which would not affect? Now, I don't see any way in which the federal structure does not get affected. Now, let me make another point here. A lot of changes in the working of Indian federalism in the last 75 years have not been a byproduct of constitutional amendments so much, save maybe the 74th Amendment to the Constitution and 73rd Amendment to the Constitution. Most of the changes in the working of federal system have been because of the reality of politics and because of important Supreme Court judgments. It has not been because of constitutional amendments. So I would go on to say that what impact one nation, one election would have, if I have serious questions as to whether it would stand judicial scrutiny. Even if it does, I'm not too sure that the cut and thrust of politics will result in what those who advocate one nation, one election would actually be able to achieve. The way I think, given the increasing importance of, I prefer personally not to call them regional parties. I call them state-based parties because there is nothing regional about them except the fact that their support base is limited to a particular state. Now, I don't see those parties being sidelined in any distant future or immediate future. So I think they are a important part and uh, very, very critical dimension of politics of this country. So I don't think, even if I were to say for a moment that one nation, one election will be implemented, will be passed, will stand judicial scrutiny. I think the reality of politics could very well change the whole dynamics. And like happened in Nanded, people may actually give two different verdicts when it comes to a Lok Sabha election and a Vidhan Sabha election when it is held simultaneously. What is the amendment procedure to get ONOE passed? As I would see it, it would require a two-thirds majority in both houses of parliament. And I would believe it also requires to be ratified by at least half the states. That would be needed for it to actually be implemented. Lok Sabha, I think in both the houses, the NDA would need support beyond its core formal supporters if this has to be passed. So
So
that much
great
for
quick
the. But
comment from
I would strongly advocate that if people are serious about doing well in the face-to-face dialogue, the final stage of the civil service interview, it's important that we speak up rather than confine ourselves to writing it and only showing me a black box in front of me. One of the important trainings is to be able to articulate what you have to say.
I request all of you to kindly unmute and ask your
Uh,
questions. That would
Good
help.
evening, sir.
Yeah, tell me, go ahead.
So, my name is Vinay Vadeyar.
Hmm.
Other than simultaneous election, what central government can do to reduce the election-related problems?
The question
That's
is, what can the central, what can, it's not just a question of central government. I think what can the system do
Yeah,
to
yeah, yes, sir.
reduce election-related problems. Now, what would be for me the election-related problems? I think one of the biggest challenges in elections is the type of unaccounted wealth that is spent in elections. That for me is one huge challenge that you have in elections. The type of money that is spent in our elections, both by parties and by individuals, and not so much what is given in the account statements by parties about expenditure, but then what I call the invisible expenditure that happens. Now, for me, that's a very simple thing. Uh, as long as your parallel economy flourishes, elections is a way and means to try and convert black money into white money. So, unless you get a hold on that, I don't think you will be able to resolve this question of money power in elections. The other question is, I think, for elections to be more democratic and representative, I think it's important that there is greater democracy within political parties. I think the quantum of democracy in each political party, I think, varies very little, and there is very little internal democracy within all political parties. So I think there needs to be greater teeth to the legislation. The parties seem to be one institution which do not have much legislation to I wouldn't say control, but to regulate their functioning. That I think is an important requirement again for me. So I would think of these two things which immediately need to be done in order to ensure that elections are more fair and more free.
Sir, my other question is,
Go ahead.
with respect to state election commissions,
Mm,
uh, I heard recently most of the states there is lots of issues about the panchayat elections.
mm.
Uh, how can be the which needed modification to the state election commission to strongly strengthen the panchayat elections because to
Uh,
strengthen the grassroots government.
but why are you not looking at the debate which is today happening about the independence of the National Election Commission also? At both the levels, the challenge is there. Today,
Yes,
people are raising the question as to whether the National Election Commission also acts with the degree of autonomy and independence that it should act with. And as you say, yes, our state election commissions, which look after the panchayat local body elections, also need to be given greater teeth. Uh, they use some excuse or the other to postpone local body elections. In Bangalore city, we have not had the BBMP election, long overdue. So yes, I agree with you that the legislations at the state level need to be strengthened. While you do have the 73rd and 74th Amendment mandating that, parties in power find a range of reasons not to go ahead with the local body elections. And this is irrespective of political party. Whichever party comes to power, we have had this challenge in Karnataka, be it the BJP or be it the Congress, both have shuffled or have been a little, have developed cold feet when it comes to taking the initiative for urban local body elections further. Yes, at both levels, I think we need to strengthen the mechanisms for ensuring timely elections and uh, increasing public confidence in the autonomy, independence of the election authorities in the conduct of the election, beyond a shadow of doubt.
Yes, sir.
thank you, sir. If you
Public
don't mind, my last question can I ask?
Okay, one last on this before I move to the next topic.
Sir, being an IAS officer, what he can make the pivotal role to strengthen the local bodies?
If I can put it in a lighter vein, I don't know if y'all will be part of the problem or part of the solution. Because one of the challenges in the local body system is we have bureaucratized local bodies. Uh, Let me take this forward.
Yes, sir.
Uh, I don't know how many of you are aware of this. When Karnataka under Ramakrishna Hegde and Abdul Nazir Saab, revolutionized in important ways the Panchayati Raj system and brought in the 1985 Panchayati Raj legislation. That was a legislation which, in theory, uh, gave supremacy to the political representative in the running of the local body. 2 points. If you remember, in the 1985 legislation in Karnataka, the what is today called the CEO of the Zilla Panchayat was at that point of time called the Chief Secretary of the Zilla Panchayat. The argument was, just as you have a Chief Secretary at the state, you will have a Chief Secretary in every Zilla Panchayat. Secondly, and more importantly, the 1985 legislation led to the Chief Secretary of the Zilla Panchayat being an officer senior to the Deputy Commissioner of that particular district. Between the Deputy Commissioner and the Chief Secretary of the Panchayat, the Chief Secretary was an officer of greater seniority. Now, what was the message? The message was development functions are much more important than law and order and revenue collection functions. But when Karnataka had to fall in line with the 73rd and 74th Amendment, and Karnataka passed a new Panchayati Raj Act, if I remember right, in 1995, we reversed the whole process. We brought in the CEO, and the CEO was an officer junior to the Deputy Commissioner in a district. And we also made the Adhyaksha of the Zilla Panchayat less powerful as a result of the 1995 legislation as compared to the 1985 legislation. In fact, some of us believe that states like Karnataka, states like Kerala went several steps backward to fall in line with the national legislation. We were actually much better before the 1995 legislation when we had to make changes to I would very strongly say, because we had bureaucratized in important ways the Panchayati Raj system. Now, a lot of civil servants, practicing civil servants, would support the 1995 legislation, saying that the 1984-85 legislation led to the politician being important and the bureaucrat having to be under the political leadership. Now, I don't see that as a challenge. I think you don't throw the baby away with the bathwater. So tomorrow, if you become an IAS officer, I would want you to respect the fact as a CEO of the Zilla Panchayat that the popular mandate which is given at the local level needs to be respected. And the CEO is not like the agent of the state government at that local body to make sure that the diktat of the state government is implemented. Now, I would believe that goes against the fundamental norms of the whole philosophy of local government. So
Thank you so
maybe
much, sir.
let me move on to a next theme. Is that okay?
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Yes, we'll go on to the next theme about institutions. Specifically, we're touching on
No,
judiciary. Probably along with
I'm going in a
that.
particular order. I'm going to next talk about delimitation. I'm then going to talk about caste census, and then finally judiciary and federalism. Now, as you all know, a delimitation exercise is done at regular intervals. A delimitation commission is appointed whose task is to look at redrawing the boundaries of the Lok Sabha and within every Lok Sabha, the Vidhan Sabha constituencies, deciding on what should be the number of seats that you have in the Lok Sabha and the Vidhan Sabha. Now, the last time this change was done, the Delimitation Commission was given a mandate that there will be no increase in Lok Sabha seats. That would be kept at the limit of 543, which was done in the 1970s, though, of course, a seat here and there were added when certain union territories were made states, but the overall cap on the number of Lok Sabha seats remained the same. And last time the delimitation exercise kept in mind that there will be no more increase of Lok Sabha seats, but there will be redistribution of there will be a redrawing of the boundaries of Lok Sabha seats within every state, but the same number of seats will continue for every state. The number of seats will not be defined by the changing census statistics. Now the question that everybody is raising is, the next time the census operation is done, that census operation will be followed by a exercise of delimitation. Now, will this delimitation reopen this entire question of redistributing the seats on the basis of the population at a national level? Or, like in the past, will you say that the number of seats for every state, either in terms of real numbers or in terms of percentages, will remain the same? Or would you say that that will undergo a change? Because this question is critical because it has very, very important demographic and political implications. Let me stress what I am trying to indicate. Suppose the number of Lok Sabha seats are kept at 543, and we decide to reallocate these 543 states across the country on the basis of the population share of every state. And I'm just taking 4 examples for this. Karnataka. Karnataka, when the last exercise was done, Karnataka's share in the national population was 5.2%. So our share of Lok Sabha seats was 5.2 seats, 28 out of 543. Now, Karnataka's share, if you are going to redistribute the total number of seats, Karnataka's share in the projected, now this is just a projection because the census has not yet been done. The projection is that Karnataka's share from 5.2 will come down to 5%. And Karnataka may, as a process, suffer a slight decline of seats. Uttar Pradesh, which had 14.7% of the seats, with the new census figures, could well have 16.2% of the seats. Tamil Nadu, which today has 7.2% of the seats, could see a reduction in its share of seats to 6%. And Kerala, which has 3.7% of the seats, could see a reduction in its seats share to 2.2%. I have done a study which shows that if the 543 seats were to be redistributed based on a likely census figures which are going to emerge, South India, East India, and Northeast India are likely to lose 25 seats out of 543. And all these 25 seats get transferred largely to North India. Tamil Nadu would lose 7 seats. Kerala would lose 6 seats. Andhra Pradesh would lose 3 seats. Karnataka and Telangana would lose 1 seat each. Odisha would lose 2 seats. Meghalaya, Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh would lose, West Bengal and Goa would lose 1 seat each. And the beneficiaries of these seats would be Jharkhand would get 1 more seat, Haryana would get 1 more seat, Maharashtra would get 2 more seats, Madhya Pradesh would get 4 more seats, Rajasthan would get 5 more seats, Bihar would get 5 more seats, and Uttar Pradesh would get 7 more seats. So 25 seats from the south, east, and northeast would directly get transferred to the north and Maharashtra. So this is what a new delimitation exercise, which strictly goes by the population numbers, would result in. Now, this would be something which could have long-term lot of implications. So there are two things that are being talked about. Many people argue that even if you do a delimitation exercise, the share of every state would remain the same, and you will do the redistribution of boundaries of Lok Sabha seats and consequently Vidhan Sabha seats within a state. So if you do that, in the smaller states, I'm not talking of the Northeast where there is just 1 or 2 seats, but if you stop at, let us say, Kerala, states like Kerala, the average voter size in each of these, if you put it at 0.15, in states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, it would be 0.23. So that's the type of difference you will have in the number of voters in a Lok Sabha seat in Kerala and Uttar Pradesh. That is, if you retain the current number of seats, both in terms of numbers, or even if you were to do a increase of Lok Sabha seats, the percentage. Now, let me come to that. There are some people who argue, let us increase the Lok Sabha seats from 543 to, let us say, 888, because the new Lok Sabha chamber can accommodate 888 members. What will happen then? If you increase the Lok Sabha seats to 888 and then divide it proportionately based on population projections, what will happen is Karnataka, which currently has 28 seats, which is 5.2%, it would go up to 42 seats out of 888. So there is an increase of seats, but 42 out of 888 would be just 4.7% of the seats, as against the current 5.2% of the seats. In Uttar Pradesh, it would go up to around 145 from the present 90. In a state like Tamil Nadu, it would come down, and Tamil Nadu's share will only be 5.4% of the seats as compared to its current 7.2% of the seats. So the whole question of delimitation thus raises two questions. One, are you going to redistribute the seats on the basis of the new population census? Or are you going to freeze the number of seats for every state as per what is? And even if you increase the number of Lok Sabha seats, the percentage of each seat would remain, each state would remain the same. And I've given you the data for this and what does the data say about this. So let me stop on that here, and let me respond to any questions that may be there from friends on this point. I'm sorry, not Bharati, Bharat. Bharat is
Good evening,
limiting his participation only to the box.
Sir, I was sitting in the library, so I could not.
Okay, go ahead, Bharat.
So I've come out now.
Hmm.
So,
Tell me.
is it a punishment for South India for reducing the population rate in the
A lot of people in the South would believe that that is true. That I told you, 25 seats automatically going to the north of India. And out of these 25 seats, 18 are from the South. So some would argue that because and it's very clear, all the states who are losing seats are states which have been successful in terms of population control in the 1980s and 1990s. Now, many of the northern states have picked up post 1990s in terms of reducing the population growth percentages. But that will impact and that will show up 15 years from now. But as of now, this what seems to be the reduced share in the population of the southern states and northeastern states is a direct byproduct of these states being successful in terms of population growth control. And as you rightly said, is that the cost that the South has to pay for reducing, for having brought a control on its population growth? Is the price you pay reducing the share of your seats in parliament? Now, one very tricky argument people come up with is, no, your seats will not reduce. When the Lok Sabha seats increase, your seats will also increase. That's a little devious argument, because in real terms your seats may increase, but in relative terms your percentage of seats as part of the total share of seats will actually come down. As I told you in the data I showed you, that in a state like Tamil Nadu, your seats will come down from 7.2%, it would come down to 5.4%. In Karnataka, it would come down from 5.2% to 4.7%. So, yes, I think it's a lot of people believe that whoever is the ruling party would not think it is judicious to do such an exercise and then have to face the political consequences of what voters in these things face. Because I think all political parties, especially those which are in power or would hope to come to power in the future, would want to have a national footprint. So they would be a little cautious in trying to take up a measure which would impact their electoral performance in states. So I am one of those who believes that uh, whatever delimitation exercise happens, they will not alter the share of every state in terms of its percentage of seats in the Lok Sabha. That's my own reading of the situation. But then I could be proved wrong.
So is there any alternative way to balance this cost, like giving more share to the southern states according to their financial strength?
Now,
Because however
I
their
would
voice is reduced in the parliament.
I would not say that they should have more share because of their financial strength. I would say we need to protect the current share. You see, rather than saying the states which are going to lose seats if you do a census-based redistribution of seats. I'm not saying that you have multiple formulas for deciding how much should be the share of every state, but then freezing this number of freezing the percentage share of every state is what I believe we need to follow. And if you keep the Lok Sabha seats at 543, retain the current numbers. If you increase the Lok Sabha seats to 800 plus to whatever else you want, then the percentage share of every state should be reflective of its percentage share today. That's what I would argue. Because you bring in the economic contribution element, there are other complications which come in.
Hi,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
As there is a delimitations in the seats in the south side, so do you think that south side development will be going slowly and they will not achieve as fast as the seats more in north side?
Now, I'll come to this particular point more in detail when I come to the last point of federalism and fiscal balance. If you look at the five states of the South, uh, the better performance of the five states of the South economically has a lot to do with the capacities of these five states to raise revenues at the state level. I think much of what the southern states have been able to achieve is a byproduct of the economic infrastructure that has been created in these states. Some would argue that a more fairer share from the federal government would have worked to the advantage of the southern states, especially in a situation where the southern states have largely had governments in the recent past which have had no share in the government in the national level. So there are some who believe that the southern states would have had a much bigger share But my argument is that whatever economic development has happened in the states is because of the head start that the South had in terms of this development, and secondly, because of the greater access to education and other benefits that we have had in the South. And thirdly, also because of the revenue generation capacities of the governments in the state. So this, I think, for me is a major factor which has permitted the states to move forward. Now, some would even argue that uh, some of the states of the South uh, would be doing as well as some of the middle range states in Europe with regard to their economies individually. And some of the poorer states of this country would also compare a little better than the states of sub-Saharan Africa. So you see, you have that huge dramatic variation in India. Those of us who have had a chance to travel across the country would notice this very important difference that you see across the country in terms of access to resources, in terms of the levels of development that you notice, in terms of popular aspirations, and from different angles. I think the South, in that sense, is very different. But I must also concede the point that within the South itself, there are areas where there are pockets of economic backwardness. Whenever I travel to Kalyan Karnataka region within Karnataka, I notice this difference very starkly visible. I happened to go recently to Gulbarga and then to Raichur and then to Bidar on work. And I very clearly saw the difference that is there in terms of the uh, economic viability and prosperity in those regions as compared to certain other regions of the state. So maybe that would be the broad point I would make on that.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Yes, sir. So my question is, if you are going to freeze the number of or percentage of seats, is it
Hmm.
not going to violate one vote, one value? And isn't it an injustice to North Indians? And can we think of strengthening the interstate council as a way forward and have two seats for every state in the Rajya Sabha? Can we think of this as a solution, sir?
It's a great point that you are making. Now, you're right in saying that one state, one person, one vote, one value, that principle is being strongly violated if you do not keep in mind the population figures when deciding the whole question of if you were to freeze the number of Lok Sabha seats. Now, my response to that is if you look at the relative share, as I said, if you were to freeze the Lok Sabha seats, um, in the states with a bigger population, the average on a scale of 1 to 100 would be 0.23. On a scale of, 0 to 1 would be 0.23. Whereas for a mid-sized state like Kerala, which is the largest loser otherwise in terms of number of seats, it would come down to 0.15. So a difference of zero point 0.8, which is one-fourth of 0.23, I don't think is that dramatic a difference. And I would also argue that increasingly today, the states are becoming the center of politics of this country. And therefore, what happens at the state level, what happens in the government at the state level becomes more crucial. And at the state level, you can always increase the number of state members of the state legislature to keep that factor into account. Now, on your interstate council thing, as you would know that the interstate council was only formed in 1990 by the VP Singh government, though it has been there in the constitution right from day one. And correct me if I'm wrong, to the best of my knowledge, the Interstate Council full body has not had a single meeting in the last 10 years. And more than 10 years, even when the UPA was in power, the subcommittees may have met, but the whole Interstate Council body has, to the best of my knowledge, not met for quite some time. Now, in theory, Interstate Council seems to be the appropriate body for a lot of these decisions to happen. But I'm not too sure whether the Interstate Council would really be effective in resolving these issues. Also, remember, India is a parliamentary system, unlike the United States, which is a presidential system. So even if you were to give equal seats to all states in the Rajya Sabha, because of the nature of the parliamentary system of government, the lower house automatically has a precedence over the upper house on many matters. So simply by giving equal number of seats to all states in the upper house may not really resolve the challenge of discrepancy or disproportionate importance of states in the upper house. So that would be my response to the points that you made.
Thank you, sir.
I hope what I said made some sense to people.
Definitely.
So let me, Prashant, can we take half an hour more if that's okay?
Yes, sir. Please, sir. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Let me move on now to the third point. The whole question of the whole debate on the caste census. I think, and when I sent Prashant my article on 75 years of the Indian Republic, which I request him to share with everybody, one of the important points I've raised in that is this whole question of social justice and looking at the caste census from the lens of social justice. If you look at the 2024 elections, you see two narratives on social justice which came up in that election. You had the BJP and the NDA focusing on the whole question of, I'm just trying to pull out my article which I sent. If you look at the BJP's critical slogan in the Lok Sabha election, they had expanded their early. See, the slogan began with Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. And then, if you remember, after the 2019 victory, in his first speech acknowledging the victory, Prime Minister Modi added one more point to that: Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas. He added that to that. And in the run-up to the 2024 elections, he added a fourth one, which was Sabka Prayas. So now that slogan is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Prayas. With everyone, development for all, trust of all, efforts of all. So in a sense, the social justice slogan, which the BJP and I must correct myself, a lot of partners in the NDA don't endorse their slogan. Nitish Kumar and Chirag Paswan being the main ones. The whole belief that you are talking about welfare, well-being of all, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Prayas. Now that being the wider slogan of social justice. And on the other hand, the Congress making the point of the need for a caste census, because you need to know what are the numbers of each caste group, because when you talk about a policy of reservation, of giving the benefits of reservation, today, especially when it comes to the OBCs, the reservation percentages are defined by an extrapolation of a census done in 1931. It's that old, 100 and nearly 100 years old. Now that numbers are being extrapolated and we are trying to calculate the relative percentage of various caste groups. So the counter argument is that we need a caste census to find out what is the actual numbers of every caste group so that we frame our reservation policy keeping that factor in mind. Now, in this context, let me just make one or two points. Point number one, something I want all those who are preparing for the civil service exams to fully appreciate. See, I have always, whenever Prashant was in my class, I've always made this distinction between the philosophy of reservation and the practice of reservation. I have serious challenges with the practice of reservation. But I would not say the same about the philosophy of reservation. You see, the philosophy of reservation has strong underpinnings in the reality of inequality, social inequality, which continues to be there in Indian society. Now, that reality is something I would not like to ignore. Now, I have a lot of young people telling me, why should today people suffer for what happened 100 years ago or 50 years ago? But in a sense, let's not remember it's not just about 100 years ago, 50 years ago, but then the socialization process or the cumulative experience which continues to impact on people. Now, are those who deserve the benefit getting the benefit? That's a different debate. That's about the practice of reservation. And I think the most contentious debate is with regard to backward caste reservation, because many of you would know that scheduled caste and scheduled tribe reservation is which was something mandated by the constitution and which was extended and has been extended at regular intervals. And that's the reason they get the name of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Earlier it was called depressed classes. The word scheduled caste, scheduled tribe came in because it's part of one of the schedules of the constitution. And that is a reservation that is constitutionally mandated. And I think the only debate about that has been internal reservation within the scheduled caste groups, that should you not prevent an elite capture of the benefits of reservation, because there are those who argue that within the scheduled caste groups, and scheduled tribe groups, there are only certain groups which have taken away all the benefits of reservation. And therefore, should you not therefore say the benefit of reservation should be limited to one generation and the next generation should claim only the higher level of benefit? By which I mean, suppose somebody has got into the state civil services because of the benefit of reservation, his children should only seek it at the higher level and not at that same level. Now, that's the logic of first generation beneficiary that people talk about. But then the real bone of contention has been the question of backward caste reservation. Because remember, backward caste reservation was permitted by the constitution after the identification of who are the backward castes. Now, again, here, there has been variation across states. There are many states in the south, including Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, and states like Maharashtra, which had brought in backward caste reservation much earlier than others had brought in. And as you all know, the national level backward caste reservation came in only after the VP Singh government decided to implement the Mandal Commission report. That also was challenged in the court and took a few years for it to actually be practiced. So at the national level, backward caste reservation has come in only in the mid 1990s. But in many states, including the state of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Maharashtra, backward caste reservation has been there for quite some time. You also would remember and understand that backward caste, as defined by various state acts, is very different from the backward caste as defined in the national list. There are caste groups who have the status of backward in Karnataka in the state level, do not have it at the national level, and vice versa. So That is another bone of contention. And I think the real bone of contention is, does the backward caste list include those who are genuinely backward, and therefore states like Bihar have now made subcategories of most backward castes and similar things happening. But that's properly developed or not. I also recall that when the Supreme Court gave the green signal for backward caste reservation, the Supreme Court had also said that there should be the concept of creamy layer, and those who form part of the creamy layer should be taken away from the benefit of reservation for the backward caste. And initially, there were very parameters which were created as to who would be the creamy layer. But over time, there has been dilution of that. And more importantly, many would argue that today it's not very difficult to be able to secure a backward caste certificate. And I remember when working in a public university in the 1990s and was looking after admissions, people used to come and ask me, sir, in which backward caste category do you have vacancies? And let me know so that tomorrow I can get a certificate from that, but for that particular group with that particular income limit. So there have been questions about the authenticity of the documentation which people produce. So again, here I'm not challenging the philosophy of reservation. I'm looking at the practice. Most of us have a challenge with the practice. I do hope those who have their heart in the right place do not challenge the philosophy of reservation, because the philosophy has got its strengths, and the philosophy has got its value. Prashant knows this example I always quote. Suppose all of us were to go on a picnic, and before lunch, you all decide that we have a little exercise and say, let's have a 100-meter race, a 100-meter running competition. Now, the question I ask, if this was an offline class, would be, would I be willing to take part in that race? Or would I avoid taking part in that race? What would your answer be? I'm met by a stunning silence. What does that mean? Prashant,
Yes,
do you
sir.
think I'll take part in that race?
Yes. I know the answer, so I'm avoiding the answer idea. But probably once if you repeat, they would be able to gauge the answer.
Okay. I would not take part in the race, people say, because I'm 65, 64 years old, and you are all young people, and there is no point in running the race with you because you will definitely defeat me, though, of course, I may actually surprise you. So then one of you says, okay, sir, I keep in mind that you are 64 years old. So you stand at 40 meters and we stand at 0 meters, and let's run the race that way. So we will run 100 meters, you will run 60 meters, and that would be a more fair competition. Maybe I would agree. But then now I'm asking a question. Have you given me a concession of standing at 40 meters? My answer is no. You have not given me a concession. It's my right to stand at 40 meters if this has to be an equal competition. So that's my whole philosophy of why special treatment is meted out to certain segments of the society. Are they going back to implementation? Are the right people getting it? That's a totally different debate. So I believe a caste census, especially when you have a policy of reservations based upon caste and backwardness, if you are going to continue with caste-based reservation, you need to have a handle on what is the strength, what are the numbers of each caste group, to justify the fact that you are giving reservations to various groups. And in order to do that, you require a caste census, but I'm going to add a rider to that. Not only because we have seen Bihar and Karnataka both having had a caste census and a lot of debate about that in both the states. The question is how transparent, how open, how fair is that census process? Now, that I think is another question that needs to be addressed. The fairness. Now, if one were to look at the leaked census report, caste census report of Karnataka, there is a lot of apprehension that all segments that it did not really cover all people. I know a lot of people have said nobody came to my house and asked, so how do I know that this was done properly? So yes, uh, the fairness, transparency, openness, and the correctness of the way in which the census is done, I think is important and needs to be kept in mind. So those are the quick points I would make about the caste census. Prashant, any additional points you think we should raise on that?
No, sir, I think largely you have covered the idea, but from an
If
aspirant,
anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask me.
from an aspirant's point of view, if there's a question put forward by the panel asking, would you support the idea of caste census? How measured should be the response?
Now, if I were attending the interview, I would make the 2-3 points I just now made. That as long as you have caste-based reservations to justify the quantum of reservation that is being given to various groups, you will need to have data. And we cannot rely on extrapolating a 1932 data set that we are using. A rider to that I would add is that while it is important to do a caste census, that caste census needs to be fair and transparent and something that is above board. I think, no, as long as you are going to have reservations based on caste, especially for backward castes, I think, how do you justify such a reservation unless you really know the authentic numbers for that? You are simply going ahead with reservations based upon an extrapolation of the 1930 figures, which I think is something not fair to be able to do. I would be a little cautious in and I hope Prashant I can be open on this.
Yes,
I
sir,
would
please.
be a little cautious in challenging the whole fact of reservation. I would endorse, I would appreciate if you make this distinction between the philosophy and its practice. Yes, there are problems in practice. Most of us have frustrations with the reservation policy, not in terms of the philosophy, but in terms of the practice. If these 3 points are made, I think you will be showing that you have understood the debate, and more importantly, as a prospective officer, you have your heart in the right place. Or heart is always in the right place. The heart ticks for the right things.
That should go ahead, sir.
Anybody who wants to raise a question, or should I move to the final 2 areas?
Hello, sir. Sir,
Yeah.
as you said, transparency, and currently in Karnataka, the government is not ready to make it public, the report. Uh, but we should be knowing the fair data, right?
Yes. No. Why is the government not releasing the report? It was done nearly 7-8 years ago. So some people are saying, have not changes happened in the last 6-7 years? Can you talk about it based on what was done 6-7 years ago? And again, let's be honest. This report, if you were to believe the leaked report, it indicates that the dominant castes in Karnataka, the Lingayats and Vokaligas, do not have the numbers that they are projected to have as per the extrapolation we have done. The leaked data shows that the numbers of these 2 communities is much less than what is projected. Now that has been the bone of contention. Given the political power that the 2 dominant castes have, now ministers from these 2 groups have been resisting the release of the report, including very senior ministers in government. So that's where the challenge lies. And their argument, the argument of those ministers who are raising questions about this caste census is that it has not been done fairly and we need to review the process by which it was done. And remember, there is this tussle today in the government between the OBC segments and the dominant caste segments, and that is causing and is linked to many other political developments in the ruling party in the state. Now, somebody is asking this question, will the authentic numbers lead to, Bharat is raising this question, will the authentic numbers lead to demand for removal of the cap on 50% at the central level? No. You see, let's remember what was the logic of the Supreme Court saying reservations should not exceed 50%. This is something all of you should be very clear about. Let's remember, reservation is an exception. Equality is the rule. The right to equality is the rule. Reservation is an exception to the right to equality. So what Supreme Court said is the exception can never be more than the rule. When something is an exception, it should be less than the rule. So therefore, reservation can never be more than 50%. That's the logic. That's the logic. It's not that if the backward castes are around 70% of the population, you should have 70% reservation. No. The logic of reservation is it's an exception, and the Supreme Court has held that exceptions can never be more than the quantum that the rule holds. So that is the logic which defines this 50% cap which the Supreme Court has suggested. Though, of course, a lot of politicians have been challenging that. But the Supreme Court stand, which I believe is the correct stand, is that the right to equality is the rule and reservation is an exception, and the exception can never be more than the rule. That's the basic argument. So, Bharat, I hope that answers your question. So let me now quickly move to the last two issues. Let me come to the judiciary. Now, there are a lot of people who argue that India for some time now has been seeing a phase of judicial activism where the judiciary has been very liberal in the interpretation of its role and in the interpretation of its powers. And I think I would believe there are two factors which have come into play in this judicial activism. One, when the legislature and the executive do not do what they should be doing, when the legislature and the executive do not perform their responsibilities the way they should, the judiciary argues we have to step in and then direct the judiciary and the legislature to do what they should be doing, or if they refuse to do it, we take on that responsibility ourselves. So one reason for this expanded judicial activism is the belief that the executive and the legislature are not performing their role, and therefore we need to step in and ensure that that role is performed. The second point which we need to keep in mind in this debate is over the years, the judiciary has come to believe that as the protector of the Constitution and as the defender of the constitutional norms, it becomes important for us to intervene on behalf of the people of the country. It becomes important for us to step in and ensure that the spirit of the Constitution is adhered to. What has also happened is that the executive and the legislature has been playing, if you may, to the gallery and saying that we would like to do many things, knowing that what they want to do is a patent violation of the Constitution. And when they go ahead and do it, they then would say that, look, we wanted to do all this, but the judiciary has stepped in and has prevented us from doing all this. And that again this is for me the second factor which accounts for the judiciary having to intervene and take action. Now, having said both these points, I would now make a third point. As Plato said years ago in his Republic, who will guard the guardian? Now, that's the question that we need to address. Who will guard the guardian? Now, as long as the judiciary says what is something that people support, then fine. Then we applaud the judiciary. But what when the judiciary says something which does not have what you could call a popular support? Now, then do you take offense at what the judiciary is doing? And a much wider question: who will guard the guardian? Now, who will ensure that the judiciary ensures consistency in its stand? Because we are noticing how higher levels of courts overturn judgments of lower levels of courts, of how higher levels of courts reinterpret decisions taken in the past in the light of developments or in the light of new interpretations. So the question a lot of people would raise, and this is not just in India, that's happening globally. The question a lot of people would raise is the question of consistency of judicial decisions, or are judicial decisions also becoming sensitive to political cues? Does the judiciary sometimes also want to play itself as being politically correct? Is the question. Look at what is happening in the United States. One of the first decisions of Trump that those who are born in the US don't automatically get citizenship has now been challenged by a judge of the Supreme Court, and there is a temporary stay that has been put on that. So the question that I think which we need to raise here is, increasing judicial intervention is partly because of the executive and the legislature not doing their job. Number two, it is also because the executive and legislature put the ball in the judiciary court. Now, anti-defection law is a classic example. Speakers not taking decisions on acts of defection, speakers allowing the house to be dissolved and no decision taken before that. Now, does this require the intervention of the judiciary, as happened in cases in Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Madhya Pradesh? So the fact that the executive and the legislature stretch themselves beyond what the constitutional mandate would permit, requiring the judiciary to intervene. Now, these are the two factors. But when the judiciary intervenes, do you see a consistency in the way the judiciary acts? Is there some way the judiciary needs to be held accountable for what it does? Now, today there is this big debate on how judges of the Supreme Court and High Court are appointed, the recommendation method to the government and to the president, the whole presidium system of how the judiciary and the Supreme Court holds that power closely with it. Now, is that something which keeps the higher judiciary accountable? Should we talk in terms of a national judicial commission, which then oversees the way the judiciary functions and holds the judiciary to account also? I think are some of the questions that would come up as part of that discussion. So let me close that point there and see if there are any questions that people have on that.
Namaste, sir. Am I
Yes,
audible?
yes. Yeah, you are.
Sir, my name is Ishwari ji, and my question is about strengthening the institutional efficiency of judiciary. Recently, in the newspaper, I read an article. There, the author stressed about appointing distinguished jurists as judges. So, what is your opinion about this? Thank you, sir.
Now, distinguished jurist is for me a hopelessly vague term. Who constitutes a distinguished jurist? How do you define the contours and the boundaries for who is distinguished? Yeah. In my field of work, we ask the question, is somebody a distinguished professor or an extinguished professor? See, now, going back to, see, I think the scope for arbitrariness when you talk of distinguished jurist, I think comes in. And it's important that in all highest level appointments, for a level of confidence to be there in the system, I think it's important that in the process of selection, there is that level of trust that you are able to build up in the manner in which you go ahead with the selection. Now, if I were to take a diversion, one of the debates on the Election Commission's independence and impartiality is the question of the fact that only retired senior civil servants are made election commissioners, and those on the verge of retirement are those put into these positions. And is there real independence from political interference in the appointment of people to these highest positions? I would like to believe there is. But then, is there a trust deficit today that comes in? I think in the conduct, I'm one of those who believes that in the 2024 elections, there was no serious irregularity in the way votes were cast and votes were counted. Now, there could have been a debate as to whether we required that 7-8 phase of election. There could be a debate where, how is it that a big state had only a one-day poll like Tamil Nadu? And why did a state like Karnataka have a 2-day poll? And why did a state like Odisha have a more than 2-day poll? Was it to help parties in their campaigns get their key leaders to go across the country? Now, this is where the doubt comes in. That has, because you see, at the end of the day, there needs to be patent transparency in why a decision was taken. Now, how do I explain that states with similar law and order conditions do not have the same type of number of days of polling? Now, the moment this is not transparently evident, it then raises questions as to whether this was done for other reasons. And then automatically the question of the impartiality and independence of the bodies comes into play. And the same thing then comes into play for the judiciary. Now, today, why should all these inquiry commissions and all these bodies, some of which constitutional, some of which created as a result of a government order, require a former judge of the Supreme Court or High Court to occupy those positions? Now, the moment you make opportunities for retired Supreme Court and High Court judges to be appointed to certain positions. Do you not consider them as post-retirement benefits? Should retired Supreme Court, High Court judges become governors of states, as has happened? Should retired Supreme Court and High Court judges enter politics, as has happened? Now, these are questions, I think, which need to be raised to be able to ensure the fairness of the judicial process. Because at the end of the day, not only do people in the highest offices need to act fairly, there needs to be a public trust in the fact that they are acting fairly. For me, that is the lens by which democracies would see the trust factor in those occupying public positions. I hope I have clarified the point I needed to make.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
So, to the larger idea of institutions, including the Election Commission or Judiciary or some constitutional machineries, the larger perception that they are getting one-sided or they're getting government line aligned. I know it's not new, it's been part when Indira Gandhi was in power, but at least the last 10 years. So, that perception, what would be the idea?
See, a lot of us have argued that, let us say, election commissioners' appointment or any of these highest level appointments, should there be not a wider body? So now you notice there is a majority of those from the ruling party on these bodies. Now, should not the leader of the opposition in the two houses, should not the Chief Justice of India, should not the presiding officer of the two houses of the legislature also be part of such decision making? Of course, there is today a debate as to whether the presiding officers are also neutral in terms of their behavior. Because at the end of the day, the body language and action of people indicates whether there is neutrality or there is no neutrality. I was reading today an article by a very senior, distinguished, retired diplomat who raises questions about the impartiality of those who occupy the highest positions, where one is looking for impartiality in the way they conduct themselves and they go forward. Prashant, what is happening is, in this world where there is so much of polarization, and that polarization, in a sense, defines who you are and what you do. It becomes very difficult for people who hope to gain benefits from the system to actually remain neutral. Prashant himself will raise this question with me. I write 3 columns per month. And when my students read the column, they come back to me and tell me, sir, we enjoyed the article you wrote, but we still have a doubt about one thing. I said, what's that? We can't make out which party you support. I said, that's great if you can't make out. Because as a political analyst, I want to be commenting on issues rather than people. And if you're not able to make out my political preferences, because I would attack all political parties equally if they deserve to be attacked. And if you read my piece, which is coming out tomorrow morning on the state of the Indian Republic, you will notice that I have not spared any political player in that. So it then, you see, because of that, when making a point, the advantage or disadvantage is that everybody attacks you because you have not been defending them as much as they would like you to defend them. But then that's perfectly okay with me, because I don't aspire for any benefit or position from the system. And that allows me to maintain that independence. But how many who aspire for roles in the state would actually agree for that? That, I think, is the challenge that we face today. And the glorious inconsistency you see in the stands that people take clearly indicates how they have become, to a certain extent, political weathercocks, changing the way they analyze issues based upon what would help them at a given point of time. And this is one of the biggest tragedies we face. And this is not just true of India. This is very much part of the US presidential debate when it happened, where people asked the question whether what Trump and his presidential candidate, vice president, were saying were actually consistent with what they said many years ago. And they said we are consistent with what we today believe and not consistent with what we said many years ago. Thank you for getting that whiteboard off.
I'm sorry, sir. Somebody is here.
Okay, so I hope that question has been addressed. Okay, let me, okay, there is a question that has come here from Nivedita. Yes, Nivedita, I agree with you that there is an inconsistency in the way the court looks, as courts have looked at issues. I think in the RG Kar case, I am also one of those who felt that, being the rarest of rare cases, there should have been the death penalty awarded. That's a much bigger debate as to whether we should have death penalty or not. But as long as it is there on the books, I think this is one of those rarest of rare cases where it was necessary to award this. Now, here comes in, now, for all you know, you may have had a judge who has strong views on death penalty and believes that the highest form of punishment should be life imprisonment. So, how does one explain this inconsistency? I think this is where the subtle differences in perceptions and approach comes in here. And now, of course, you have a right to appeal and go to a higher court to challenge what the judge has said. And of course, that's a excruciatingly long process by which it goes forward. But now, again, here, Nivedita, on this particular point, you have both sides being made. There are those in India who are strongly against the death penalty and say that we have, however heinous the crime, we have no right to take somebody's life. See, so and this debate goes on. So those who support the debate that we should not have death penalty would applaud this judgment of the judge. And those of us who believe that as long as it is there on the statute book, it needed to be given because you have given a second highest punishment rather than the highest punishment. So this debate goes on, and obviously this debate also goes on in the minds of a judge who takes a decision. Okay, let me quickly talk about the last point which was there, which was the Indian federal system. And again, I must take a insurance policy at the beginning. I am not an economist. I am a student of politics, so I would look at it more from the frame of a student of politics. I told Prashant that you will need to get an economist, somebody like Govindrao sir, to talk about the economics of the fiscal center-state relations. I can basically look at it from a political lens. Now, there is no question of doubt that the fiscal dimensions of center-state relations has got caught in the political crossfires. The demand of states like Karnataka and Tamil Nadu and some other states like Kerala, that we contribute so much to the national exchequer in terms of the resources, but what we get back as a state is not commensurate to what we contribute. 2 points on this. And here I believe both Nirmala Sitaram and Chief Minister Siddaramaiah and Chief Minister Stalin are both correct. Nirmala Sitaram says that based upon the Finance Commission's recommendation, we go in for the formula that the Finance Commission thinks about or discusses. I remember, and I go with what Dr. Govindrao says on this because I respect him as a fiscal economist. He has made the point that the previous Finance Commission did not use sufficiently enough yardsticks to look at the distribution of revenues between the states. He believed that there was an element of faultiness in the measures that were adopted and the formulae that was suggested. And that formula is the one that has caused the challenge. And the hope is that the present Finance Commission, which is due to submit its report, would alter that challenge that we are now facing. Now, I also must make the point that there is a limitation in the argument that some states like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu have come up with, Maharashtra have come up with regard to they're not getting a fair share of the revenues that they generate. Now, let's remember, like in a city of Bangalore, the revenues that a business would generate or a trade would generate is not necessarily linked only to Karnataka or Bangalore, but it is something that comes from across the country. They may be sales and they may be revenues that are earned from across the country. So just because those revenues are deposited by a business undertaking happening in Bangalore does not, or Karnataka or Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu, does not necessarily mean that they have originated from that state. They could be from across the country. So that is an important argument that we need to keep in mind, that which is, I mean, X may be a state where that industry or the business files the revenue returns, but that revenue actually may be collected in a different state, and it is that state to which that revenue resource actually belongs to. So I think that's a much more complicated debate. And sometimes it gets caught in this political crossfire. Our money, we contributed, we are not getting back. Now, this whole question of fiscal, I wouldn't say fiscal equality, but fiscal equity goes back to the earlier debate we had on reservations. I think the same debate holds good here also. And we need to keep that in mind. I'm not one of those who will accept that argument that are Karnataka and Tamil Nadu spending their money correctly? Why should they fight about their share when they don't? Now, spending is another issue. Your right to revenue resource is another issue. There was a time when there was a belief that 1/3 of all revenues generated by the center need to go to the state from which it was collected now. And it should be left to the state to decide in their budget how they would like to use that amount. Today, a lot of what the states get from the center are tied grants, tied to certain particular schemes. So states have been reduced to, in a sense, post offices, they would argue. Their job is only to deliver a benefit to whoever it is meant for, and they have little autonomy in being able to spend the money in the way they would like to spend. That's the only point I would make on this, and I would stop there. And I would believe that this whole question of federal fiscal balance has got caught in the political crossfire. I'm seeing a repeat of what happened between 1983 and 1989, when many non-Congress governments at that point of time came together to challenge the Congress government at the center. That's when Mrs. Gandhi got the Sarkaria Commission appointed to look at the whole question of addressing center-state relations. We are seeing a return of that situation today with, of course, the uh, Congress today being on the other side and the BJP being the party in power at the center, being the one which is being attacked for the fiscal imbalance that is created.
Thank you so much, sir. I think we have addressed.
If there's any GST question, again, please ask an economist to address it. I'm not a economist, so I don't want to say something which is not fully backed by data and facts. So I would suggest that question should go to an economist, not to me.
One last question, probably in terms of states like Karnataka and others down south continuously raising voice against the tax share and becoming more political in terms of that. That was one thing that we were looking at. How will we address such a question in the interview panel?
Prashant, I have always believed that there are 3 C's when it comes to center-state equations. And the 3 C's are coordination. I'm just writing it down so that I remember it. I've written about this. I can share that writing with you all. It's about 3 words: coordination, cooperation, and competition. Let me talk about cooperation first. Let me talk about coordination first. You see, in spite of all the political differences that you notice between states, look at any NITTE Aayog report. NITTE Aayog reports often list non-NDAs ruled states as the states which are high performers on several indicators. Now, this is outside the domain of politics. And why is that? I think there is much more effective administrative coordination today that happens across states. And here I think what many of you are planning to get into is a key factor. The administrative coordination that happens across the bureaucracy for getting jobs done. I know of chief secretaries who have told me that if I want something for my state to be done, I immediately find out who is the principal secretary at the center for that department and which batch does he belong to and who are the batchmates that he has from our state cadre. And that route is used to be able to resolve and bring in issues of coordination. Now, this bureaucratic grapevine, remember, is a very, very powerful grapevine. I'm sure, Prashant, if your president of India for IAS delivers a lecture to you all on that, he would give you more indications of how this behind the scene administrative coordination happens. And a lot of bureaucrats, senior bureaucrats, both at the center and the states, who I've had a chance to speak to, have talked about how administrative coordination happens. I invite all of you to read the book Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. Both these books, and in India, a version has come out called Ji Mantri Ji, which is about how politicians think that they have got a job done, but in reality, it is the bureaucracy which has got that job done. So, administrative coordination, because of the strong unity within the bureaucracy, of course, the flip side of that is that coordination happens for what they want that coordination to happen, not on everything on which they believe there needs to be coordination that happens. Now, the second, cooperation. I think I could think of no better example than COVID-19 to indicate cooperation. When the lockdown was declared, the lockdown was unilaterally declared because it had to happen in a particular way. But then remember, after the lockdown was declared, there used to be weekly meetings of the Prime Minister and the Chief Ministers. And the inputs from Chief Ministers was taken as to what is happening in every state. And when lockdown was lifted, the Prime Minister said this is going to be a decision at the state level because the situation in every state is very different. And if we succeeded to some extent in the first wave of being able to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic more effectively, it was because of the fact that there was this cooperation between the political levels at the center and the state. There are a lot of, and I have seen writings on this, that writings on COVID-19 management in 8-9 countries shows that we were able to do it better because of this cooperation. The United States faced serious problems because of this non-cooperation between the center and state leadership, and the desire of the states to retain their role and the desire of the center to retain its. Finally, of course, a reality of federalism is the fact of political competition, which you cannot do without. When elections come or around elections time, you will see this political competition expressing itself. Last year at the Bhopal Literary Fest, I was in a discussion with somebody a journalist who has written a book, and he has been a Rajya Sabha member very close to the government. And he made this very interesting point that the current national leadership has several faces. One face as the Prime Minister, one face as a leader going out of the country, and one face as the chief campaigner for his party. And as the chief campaigner for the party, he does not speak, he says, as the Prime Minister. And as the Prime Minister, he does not speak as the chief campaigner. And when he goes abroad, so he was trying to make the argument that the leadership speaks depending upon the role that at that point of time he is playing. Now, that was an interesting perspective on political competition, which I thought was being provided. So I think for me, Prashant, these 3 C's, administrative coordination, political cooperation, and political competition, is, I think, at the core of center-state relations in India.
Great, sir. That's probably the right note to close on the session today. Thank you so much, sir, being abroad, taking time for us. And we've had elaborate discussions on almost most critical issues. And I'm sure every single participant have had a lot to take away from this. And we always hope that we can have you in-house here so that we can have a panel one-to-one discussion that's coming up very soon. I hope so. And
Sure.
wishing you
And my best wishes to all those who are appearing for the interview, and I do hope you all do well and succeed, and your efforts pay rich dividends.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you on behalf of all those
Take
who
care.
have
Yeah.
Many
Take care.
of them are taking up interviews this time, and they've been asking questions also. Thank you so much once again, sir. Thank you to all the participants, and wish you all a very happy Republic Day in advance. And as a country, as a nation, we have a lot of things to see forward, and all of the young leaders coming ahead. Thank you so much once again. And
So, Prashant, tomorrow morning, the 2-3 articles I talked about, I'll send it to you. So,
yes,
if people wish to get it from you, just let them be in touch with you and take it from you. All the best.
definitely, sir. Thank you so much, and wishing you all a very happy Republic Day. Thank you so much, sir, for making that.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.